Introduction to Philosophy, Lecture 22, on Compatibilism. This might be strike 2 for our text, because I expected a chapter on compatibilism to cover, compatibilism. However, this chapter seems to focus on incompatibilism. Furthermore, the Frankfurt-Style cases that generated immense dialogue in compatibilist philosophy isn't discussed in as much detail as incompatibilist rejections of them. Harry Frankfurt challenged the principle of alternate possibilities, or the PAP, with his famous thought experiment of Jones and Black. The PAP is the belief that people can only be morally responsible for their actions if they could have done otherwise. The reasoning behind this principle is the common sense notion that ought implies can. If someone does something wrong, we can reasonably tell them they should have done something else if doing something else was possible. The PAP is essential to incompatibilists who endorse so-called libertarian freedom. Libertarian freedom is named so in reference to the root word liberty and has nothing to do with the political ideology. Similarly, when we discuss materialism, we are talking about the metaphysical view that everything is material or physical and has nothing to do with the Kardashians. On the libertarian view, determinism would be incompatible with free will because the PAP is required for free will. That is, if we don't have the ability to do otherwise, then we are not free. They would further argue that without free will, there can be no moral responsibility. This is where Frankfurt's thought experiment becomes relevant. Imagine Black, an evil neuroscientist, wants Jones to perform some criminal act that Jones also wants to perform. To prevent the possibility of Jones changing his mind before he performs the criminal act, Black implants a device into Jones's brain while Jones is asleep. If Black sees brain activity leading to Jones's choosing not to perform the act, Black can use the device to block the brain activity so that Jones chooses to perform the criminal act. When it comes time to perform the criminal behavior, Black sees that Jones's brain activity is leading up to a conscious desire to commit the crime, so Black doesn't intervene. In this situation, Jones did not have the ability to do otherwise, and yet we would still maintain that he is morally responsible for committing the crime. So, there must be something other than the PAP that is necessary for our moral responsibility. Our text only analyzes the Frankfurt-Style cases from a libertarian, non-deterministic perspective, without giving any explanation for how a non-deterministic world could even be possible. Since we know from the studies we've looked at previously that we can see mental activity leading up to a person's decision even before that person knows that their brain has made the decision, there is a prior sign, as our text puts it, for Black to see. So, the libertarian objection in our text appears to only work in an imaginary world. In establishing one's metaphysics, it is important to remain consistent. If your metaphysics include the position that something is impossible, but we can prove it is possible using physics, neuroscience, or whatever, then we have a flawed metaphysics that is in need of updating. Since we've already touched somewhat on incompatibilist views like hard determinism and libertarian free will here and in previous lectures, for now we'll focus on compatibilism. Compatibilism is the view that free will and determinism can both be true without logical inconsistency. That is, even though we are determined, we can still be free in some sense. It is surprising that this chapter doesn't provide an analysis of compatibilism when compatibilism is currently the dominant view in philosophy. Many philosophers and scientists are attracted to some form of compatibilism because other options lead to more problematic conclusions. For example, if we reason along libertarian lines, we have a hard time making sense of how our actions follow from our reasons for acting. But if we reason along hard determinist lines, we can't make sense of our intuitions that we are free. And if we reason along hard incompatibilist lines, we have a hard time making sense of our intuition, the sciences, and moral responsibility. However, if we reason along compatibilist lines, we're able to accept scientific findings that suggest determinism, make sense of our intuitions about free will, and make sense of moral responsibility. There are many different compatibilist theories, but since we're already discussing Frankfurt's work, we'll look at his approach here. Frankfurt's approach to free will depends on his concept of persons. He believes that persons have unique structures of will that set them apart from other creatures. A person can have a first-order desire, that is, a desire to do something like eat or run or sleep, just like any other animal. But only humans seem to have second-order desires. We are capable of wanting to be different in preferences and purpose from what we are. I may have a first-order desire to drink beer and eat pizza every day, and even do so despite having a second-order desire to not do so for health reasons. Our will can be identified in our first-order desires that are effective. That is, the desire that actually moves us to action. So, in this example, my will would be to drink beer and eat pizza every day. Now, Frankfurt makes a further distinction in second-order desires. A second-order desire can simply be a desire that you wish you had, or it could be a desire you wish you had, and that you also wanted it to be your will. If I desire that refraining from beer and pizza every day actually be my will, that would be a second-order volition. Having second-order volitions, to Frankfurt, is essential to being a person. However, if I'm not able to will what I want to will, my will is not free. For example, if I have a second-order volition to refrain from my unhealthy habits, but I continue to give in to my first-order desires, then my will is not free. It is stuck where I don't want it. I don't have the will I want to have. Therefore, according to Frankfurt, it is in securing conformity of my will to my second-order volitions, then, that I can exercise freedom of will. Note that all of these concepts are consistent with a deterministic world. The information and forces of the world, be they social, political, economic, and so on, that determine my actions after being processed by my brain, can still be flowing in and out of my mind in the form of determined words and deeds, and I can still have freedom of will in Frankfurt's sense. Even though I'm being determined by the world's inputs, I still need to deliberate on it and to form my determined output. And, in the same context, I will either identify with that output or I will need to align my will with my second-order volitions. This will be affected by the deterministic input, so it will be easier for some to achieve than for others. But since persons have reason and will, we can self-reflect to determine what we want to will and work to make those volitions our will.